It still scares me how one ordinary train ride turned into the moment that detonated my entire life. If someone had told me that the man who would drain my bank account, destroy my stability, hijack my future, and nearly drag me into homelessness would enter my life because of a broken train in the middle of nowhere, I would have laughed. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. I met Kenny on a day that should have passed without meaning. I was on the Amtrak heading to Chicago to visit my sister when the train hit something on the tracks. Not enough to derail us, but enough to leave the undercarriage wrecked and all of us stranded in the middle of nowhere. Pennsylvania. They herded everyone into a tiny town with one bar, one diner, and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't updated its snacks since 1998. We were stuck for 8 hours. The diner filled up fast, so I ended up at the bar next door with my overnight bag, tired, annoyed, and texting my sister about the delay. That's when Kenny spoke to me, 2 stools down, suitcase by his feet, messy, dark blonde hair, and that easy, charming smile that fools you into thinking he's harmless. He made a joke about the universe forcing us to appreciate small town America. I laughed. Of course I laughed. We talked for hours. He was interviewing for a job. I was working in logistics. Stable, unglamorous, predictable. He told me he was tired of the corporate grind and wanted something meaningful, something big. Looking back, it was always something big with him. Big dreams, big plans, big failures, but in that bar with a beer in his hand and that smile, he just seemed like a guy trying to figure things out. We exchanged numbers. I didn't expect anything, but he texted the next day. We met for coffee, and a few weeks later, he became woven into my daily life like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't get that first job, but he had options, he said. Always something else lined up, always another opportunity just around the corner. 6 months in, his lease ended. My place was bigger and closer to downtown. I was already paying for most of our date nights since his money was tight until his next gig. So when he suggested moving in, it felt logical, responsible even. And at first, it was fine. The first month, he paid his share. The second, late. The third, excuses, delayed checks, slow clients, accounting issues. Always a reason, always a story with just enough detail to sound believable. I covered the rent because I could. Barely, but I could. He was home all day building his portfolio and networking. At least the apartment was clean and dinner was ready most nights. I told myself it was temporary, that love meant patience, that real relationships had rough patches. But the rough patch wasn't a patch, it was the foundation. My friend Jay was the first person to call it out. When I mentioned skipping a concert because money was tight, she asked how long I planned on financially sponsoring Kenny. I snapped at her, defensive and embarrassed, but the question lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. And then I started noticing things. Little things at first. My Visa card being used for small charges I didn't make, groceries disappearing faster than usual, Kenny always having money for games or drinks, but never for rent. He acted allergic to responsibility. Anytime I brought up the future, marriage, stability, anything requiring commitment, he recoiled like I'd threatened him. Then, strangely, things got better. He was suddenly energized, going out more for networking events, meeting potential clients, rebuilding his life. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted it so badly, and that's why the betrayal hit like a truck. I was having dinner with my friend M when her boyfriend casually mentioned seeing Kenny at a tech event with his fiancée. Not girlfriend, fiancée. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. M slowly slid her phone across the table to me, a blonde woman named Daria, smiling under string lights, showing off a ring. Caption: I said yes, can't wait to marry my soulmate. There were photos of them together for weeks. Even the weekend, he claimed he was visiting his parents. I left the restaurant shaking, went home, and checked our shared credit card. Restaurant charges I didn't recognize. Hotel stays. A $2,800 jewelry store purchase. He bought her ring with my money. When he walked into the apartment that night, calm, casual, cracking open a beer, I asked him where he'd been. He said, networking. I asked if he'd gotten engaged recently. His face went through shock, then settled into a sick, smug smirk. He shrugged and said, "Can we not do this?" "I don't owe you anything." But the moment that split my world open was when he rolled his eyes, took a sip of my beer, and said, "You didn't really think I'd give you a ring. You're the kind of girl men settle for when they fail." I don't remember deciding to hit him. I just remember the sound of the bottle dropping and my hand stinging. I threw him out, changed the locks, blocked him everywhere, and then began the months-long unraveling of everything he destroyed behind the scenes: my finances, my stability, my future. The night I threw Kenny out, I thought I'd finally ripped the rot out of my life. But the truth was uglier. I'd only cut off the head of the disaster. Its poisonous roots were still wrapped around every part of my stability, bleeding me dry long before I realized it. I barely slept. Every creak in the apartment sounded like Kenny coming back. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m. with a frantic sequence of messages: rage, guilt-tripping, begging, all from him. I didn't reply. That silence was the first boundary I'd set in months, and even then it felt shaky. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee that tasted like dirt and opened my bank statements. And that was when the real horror began. It wasn't just the $1,700 I'd first noticed. It wasn't just the ring or the dinners or the hotel. Kenny had been draining me in slow, quiet cuts: subscriptions I never signed up for, cash withdrawals I never made, charges so small they were invisible until they stacked themselves into a tidal wave. By the time I finished tallying the numbers, the truth made my stomach lurch. He'd taken over $5,400 from me, on top of rent, on top of bills, on top of groceries, and on top of the emotional exhaustion he'd been feeding on like oxygen. The credit card rep was sympathetic, but unmoved. Kenny had been an authorized user. The charges were too old. There was nothing to do except remove him and try to move forward. Move forward with what? Debt? Exhaustion? A dismantled life? I called the locksmith anyway. Another $170 I didn't have, but fear doesn't wait for payday. While he worked, I shoved Kenny's leftover belongings into garbage bags: protein powder tubs, cheap cologne, wrinkled shirts he thought made him look entrepreneurial. I dumped everything by the dumpster and texted him one last cold message. He had 24 hours to collect it, then it was charity. Of course, he showed up while I was dragging the last bag out. He looked awful, unshaven, sour-smelling, wearing the same clothes as the night before. He tried to talk, to twist the narrative, to insist things weren't what I thought. When he grabbed my arm, I jerked away so fast I scraped my elbow on the brick wall. I told him if he touched me again, I'd call the police so loudly every neighbor would hear it. He backed off. Not because he respected my words. Kenny never respected anything. But because cowards fold when real consequences appear. Once the new locks clicked shut, I finally let myself breathe. Just once. A small inhale that felt like freedom, but life is cruelly timed. A week later, I was called into my manager's office, not to discuss a mistake, not to offer support. They were restructuring, and my position, already stretched thin by overtime, stress, and Kenny's chaos, was being eliminated. 2 weeks' notice, a severance check that wouldn't cover half my rent, and a smile that felt like a slap. I held it together until I reached the bathroom stall. Then I broke silently, the kind of cry that never makes it to your throat because the grief is too heavy to rise. I tried calling my mom. She offered sympathy wrapped in judgment, suggesting I should have never let Kenny move in without a ring, as if a ring was some magical shield against manipulation. Going back to Florida wasn't an option. Living with my mother and her conspiracy theory husband would have been its own kind of nightmare. So I stayed. I applied to 73 jobs, got 6 interviews, 0 actual offers. And then the decline began. Week 1 of unemployment was routine. Week 2 was survival. Week 3 was desperation. Rice for dinner, cold showers, shut-off notices, electricity gone for 48 terrifying hours, selling my watch, my clothes, my TV just to stay upright. Then came the government office, hours of waiting, forms that felt like confessionals, and a worker who looked at my entire ruined financial situation and said I didn't qualify for assistance. Food banks became my grocery store. Shame became a roommate, and Kenny still lingered like a ghost. One day, a text came from an unknown number, his number or someone else's phone he'd borrowed. He said Daria left him. He was lost. He was sorry. He wanted to talk. I blocked him, but his shadow stayed. Eventually, a small warehouse job called me back breaking work for pennies, but it was something. Barely enough to keep me afloat, not enough to save me. Bills stacked faster than my paychecks. My landlord left messages that only grew angrier. And then, one evening, I came home to an eviction notice taped to my door. 30 days. Pay everything in full, including late fees or leave. I sank to the kitchen floor, numb, not crying, not screaming, just empty. That was when my neighbor knocked. Someone I'd spoken maybe 10 words to in 2 years. She saw the notice. She saw my face. And in that small moment of humanity, she offered something I hadn't felt in months. A lifeline. Her cousin Rosalie needed a place to stay. If we split rent 3 ways, I might survive. And that, strangely, unexpectedly, saved my home. Rosalie moved in within 2 days. Quiet, respectful, paid on time. She minded her own business while I put my life back together in pieces. I wish I could say that after Rosalie moved in, life instantly transformed, that the clouds parted and everything became easy. But rebuilding after someone sets fire to your stability doesn't happen in clean lines or quick fixes. It comes in slow inches. Some forward, some backward, all exhausting. The warehouse job kept me afloat, but it was draining my body faster than it was paying my bills. Every shift felt like I was moving through wet cement. My back screamed daily, my hands formed calluses, and my tooth throbbed constantly, a sharp reminder that medical care wasn't something people in my situation could just have. But then life, in its rare, generous way, offered me a crack of light. One cold morning at the bus stop, a woman made small talk about the weather, late buses, typical commuter misery. I barely paid attention until she offhandedly mentioned she worked at a medical office that needed help organizing their supply area. The second she said it, something in me snapped awake. I asked if they were hiring. She blinked, surprised, then gave me the office manager's name. I didn't have hope, but I had desperation, and sometimes they look the same. I printed my embarrassingly thin resume at the library and walked into the office the next day on my lunch break. I expected to be turned away. Instead, I walked out with a part-time job that paid better than the warehouse and actually used my skills. For the next few weeks, I worked both jobs. Morning logistics, evening heavy lifting. My body broke down, but my spirit slowly rebuilt itself. By mid-January, I had enough saved to quit the warehouse. My supervisor looked stunned when I handed in my badge, as if people like me weren't supposed to escape. The medical office expanded my hours, gave me a tiny desk, trusted me with inventory. For the first time in months, my life wasn't just surviving, it was stabilizing. Rosalie and I fell into a rhythm, 2 women with broken pasts and bruised hearts building something like peace in a tiny apartment with gray-painted walls. She cooked. I cleaned. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Respect doesn't need constant conversation. By February, I had paid off one of my smaller credit cards. By March, I could finally eat something other than rice or ramen. By April, my tooth pain became unbearable. My mom, shocked at how normal I sounded now, offered help with a dental bill if I visited. I still hated the idea of sitting through my stepdad's political rants, but pain has a way of humbling pride. I went. My tooth got fixed. I came home lighter. Kenny, for a blessed while, disappeared. No texts, no sightings, no letters. I checked Daria's Instagram once. She'd moved on. Good for her. Ugh, I wouldn't wish Kenny on my worst enemy. The months rolled into something that felt almost like life again. I repainted the apartment with Rosalie. I budgeted carefully. I rebuilt my credit score brick by brick. I even went on a couple of dates. Nothing serious, but proof that I was still capable of being someone outside the wreckage he left behind. Then, last month, Jay texted me. She'd seen Kenny in a coffee shop. He looked different. Cleaner, quieter, almost humbled. He said he was moving to Pittsburgh. I shrugged. Let him go start over somewhere else. Let him be someone else's lesson, which is why I froze when, 1 week later, I opened my apartment door and found him there. My heart dropped. My fight or flight flared, but he held up his hands immediately, as if he knew any sudden movement might send me spiraling. He told me he wasn't staying. He was leaving town and he just wanted to return something before he did. He handed me a small gift bag. Inside was an envelope and a box. The envelope held $1,500 in cash. The box held the ring, the same one he bought for Daria using my money. He said it wasn't a gesture of romance, it was restitution. The ring had been bought with my hard-earned money, so he was giving it and the cash he could spare back to its rightful owner. He said he'd continue sending payments until he repaid everything he owed me. And then, for the first time in his entire existence, Kenny didn't linger. He didn't plead, he didn't smirk, he didn't try to manipulate me. He simply said he was sorry, deeply, plainly, quietly, and walked away. I watched him leave without a single flutter in my chest. No love, no hate, no fear, just closure. The next day, I took the ring to a jeweler. It wasn't worth what the receipt claimed. Of course it wasn't. Kenny never chose anything that wasn't a facade. I got just under $1,000 for it. I deposited it straight into my savings account. Today, my life is not perfect, but it is mine. The medical office made me full-time with benefits. Rosalie moved in with her boyfriend, but a reliable grad student took her place. I can buy groceries without anxiety now. My credit score is slowly healing. I check my locks out of habit, not panic, and I've learned that trust is something you rebuild in layers, not leaps. Kenny sends payments every now and then. I don't respond. I don't need to. His chapter in my life is finished.